Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our series of Learning to Code with P5. Today, in this video, we will try to create our own drawing tool with the mirrored effect, and we'll have our interaction reflected on the canvas to create a generative pattern. This will help us also in revisiting some of our previously learned concepts, such as variables and playing around with transformations, and perhaps some mouse events. So let's get started. All right, so first things first, make sure that you've already remixed your project and you've given it a name. And then we're going to start off with our canvas. So because we are trying to create our own tool, some of the things that we already know of are, let's say, if we want to work with point, we're looking for some kind of mouse interaction with it so that we can control, because it's our drawing tool, right? An easy thing that we know of, that point needs basically X and Y coordinates of a single point, right? In the case of our mouse's position, there's already a pre-existing variable or keyword in P5, so that's mouse X and mouse Y. So if you start looking at it, and if you want to, I think that you can see, if I zoom it in, we are already seeing some of the points being drawn, right? And depending on how fast or how slow I am, either they're close or far apart. But this is not giving us, like, it's kind of not giving us a continuous point, right? So if I go super fast, it's like two distance apart. Maybe a good idea for us is to, instead of using mouse, we can work around with line, right? So if you remember, for line, we need basically coordinates, X and Y coordinates of 2 points, right? So we need an X1, Y1, basically X and Y position of the first coordinate, and then we need X2 and Y2 of the second position. So in case of our mouse, we can actually, first of all, we know that there is mouse X and mouse Y, but that is actually giving us the X and Y coordinates of the existing position of the mouse. If we want a previous position of the mouse, basically, so that it gives us a connected line, there is already an existing variable which is called P mouse X and P mouse Y. So that's going to make our lives pretty much easier. What we can do is basically create our variables. Let X is mouse X, right? Let Y1 be our mouse Y. And then the same thing that we will do here for X2, but with P mouse X, which is the previous position on the X coordinate and the previous Y position for our other point. So if I start doing this, now you can see that I can actually create a continuous, I can draw a continuous line, right? So we already have our drawing tool where we can create lines. But the thing with this one is that even, let's say, if I want to pause this line for a moment, I can, because it's being continuously drawn. One way that we can try and do that is by using a mouse event, right? There are lots of mouse events that exist in P5. You can actually go back to here to the reference page. If you can see here, there are lots of mouse events. There are mouse move, drag, pressed, so on and so forth. For our sake, we will try to work with mouse dragged. What mouse dragged does is that it, what you need to do is you have to first, well, first of all, of course, I haven't moved things here. Let's just move all of this within this. Okay, so what that needs is, as it says, it's a drag thing. So we need to click it first and then keep our mouse pressed and keep on dragging. That way we can actually draw a line. But the minute I actually release it, and even if my mouse is on the canvas, I don't need to worry about that the line is being continuously drawn, right? So I feel like I have a little bit more control on when I want to draw the line. Okay, so we will continue to actually work within our mouse dragged function and create our mirror effect as well. So now that we have our own drawing tool, what we will try to do is, let's say if basically I am drawing something here, that also gets drawn here as well. So that way, what I'm saying is that if I'm drawing something on this side, it gets mirrored on the x-axis on the other side. All right. So how we can kind of do about it is, first of all, I am going to translate our origin. So let's start off with that. If I translate my origin just on the x-axis, right? Because we are right now talking about the x-axis only. What I'm shifting is from 0, 0 point, I am keeping it still on y is still 0, which is kind of the same, but I'm only shifting on the x-axis, which is half of the canvas. So what will happen is, let's say in this case, if I draw something here where my mouse is, we can actually see it being drawn here. And why this is happening is that the translate is basically shifting the origin of the canvas. So it is all happening visually only, but my mouse is still on this side, right? What it is doing is, if you can see, let me actually go back and shift is here, is that if I want anything to be drawn where I'm where my mouse is, basically on this side, I need to offset this position back to where my mouse is. If I want to keep the translated position of the origin on the half of the canvas size. Okay, let me repeat here. So if I want something to be flipped and drawn here, what I've done is I've translated the origin of the canvas on the x-axis, right? So I've just shifted it half of the canvas. But if I want to keep it like this, but I still want the visual effect to be seen here as well, I need to offset it. And if you want to check it, anything that is being drawn here is basically, and let me just print here, x1, and we are going to see and what's happening on our canvas right now. So right now you can see the values are all in positive, right? Because my mouse technically is showing here, but it's drawing over there. But let's say, and I'm going to move this a little bit below, if I offset it here, for both the x coordinates. Now what I see, everything is being drawn. Okay, let me pause this. If I now I can see that although my position is still translated here, I am seeing everything being drawn over here as well. But what's happening is that my x position is not in the positive, it's now shifted as a negative. Why? Because 0, 0 point is on this side. And I can see the same thing here as well. So if I'm drawing anything here, it's all in negative, because it is understanding that, okay, my 0 point for x is already moved. So anything being drawn is in a negative side. Anyway, so this was just a little thing to show you how we are kind of shifting, even though we are translating it, but we are offsetting it so that we can visually see this thing on wherever we are trying to draw. Okay, so once we have sort of done that, is now that we have shifted our x here, we can still see things being drawn here. What I want to do is whatever I draw here, that should be drawn here as well. For that, what we will try and do is I'm going to use the same line thing, and I'm going to use it here, but I'm going to use another function which is going to come in super handy for us, and that is the scale function. So far, we have been using the scale function only to increase or decrease the size, basically control the size of the shape. But for this one, we will use another trick, that is that it will help us mirror our shape as well. So what we will try and do here is I'm going to say -1 and 1, because 1 is basically wherever the y position is. Minus is basically I am shifting on the x-axis. So now whatever I draw here is being shown here as well. Of course, everything is the same here in terms of line parameters, because whatever gets drawn is being drawn over here. So I haven't made any changes to it. I've only played around with the scale function. Okay, what if I want to now flip it not just on the x-axis, but also on the y-axis? So first of all, I need to translate here on the y-axis as well. So I am going to say, okay, height divided by 2. So now what's happening is that the whole canvas is being shifted here at the center. And I need to offset things here as well, because if I kind of draw, you can see that even though I'm here on the first half, my cursor is, but everything has been moved down. So I need to offset this as well in our Y position. So, okay, so now what we have done here is I've done that, and I'm going to copy and do the same thing to scale it. And now what I will do is I will keep this as constant, and I'm going to use this as the negative. So if I'm drawing something over here, I can see that happening somewhere else. Technically, it should have been happening in this coordinate. Why? Because I have flipped this on the x-axis, but right now, if you look at my scale, it's 1 and -1. Technically, x is the same, but I have only shifted my y coordinate. But I'm seeing it here, and this is happening because just like translate, scale is also cumulative. So if we wanted to make if we want to make sure that they all work independently, I'm going to use the push and pop thing so that none of these impact the other ones, and they can all behave the way we want them to be. All right, so now once I have done that, I'm going to quickly format this for a second. And if I draw something here, now we can see that it's moved here on the x-axis, and it has also flipped on the y-axis. But if we want something to be drawn on our fourth coordinate, fourth quadrant, we need to not just flip it on the x-axis, but then we need to flip it on the y-axis so that it can be drawn over here. What we will do is I'm going to copy the same thing, and we are just going to play around with the scale function, and I'm going to do it minus as well. Right? So now what's happening is that whatever I'm drawing here, it's being drawn on all 4 quadrants, because now it's not just flipped on the x-axis, but it's also flipped on the y-axis as well. So you can see a very nice, cool mirrored effect. This is something that you would have seen happening in Adobe as well, or maybe Procreate and other kind of softwares. But now you're able to do it on your own through coding. So I think that's a great start. One thing that we can do is that right now, because we are playing around with line and it is just a single kind of stroke, right? So maybe it's a little bit thin if we want it to be a bit more dynamic. And this is just more a visual purpose. We can add a bit more life to these lines by looking at the distance between my previous position and my current position of the mouse, and make sure if the stroke is thick or thin depending on how far apart these 2 coordinates are. And the way we can kind of do that is I'm going to add this here. So let's say, remember our dist function? What we can say is create, let d is dist. We are going to calculate the distance between the x and y current position and the previous position. So it's the same thing. So between x1, y1 and x2, y2, you're going to calculate that distance and pass it into our variable d. And then I can use this d to control or determine, not to control, but basically determine the weight of the line. And I'm going to use this inside this. So now what happens is that, let's say if I draw anything here, it is being impacted. But if you notice, depending on how fast or how slow I am, it is making it either thick or thin. And why do we feel that the speed is kind of dependent on it is because if my mouse's, the distance between my mouse previous and current mouse position is smaller, that's why the stroke weight is also thinner. But if it is faster, so basically they're far apart, or if the point is jumping really far apart from one point to the other, then that becomes a bigger distance, and then that becomes a bigger stroke weight for the line. So that's how the line, the thickness is also kind of dependent on it. So you can create as much as whatever you want. You can see, of course, this has a little like a hot dog sort of feel to it. And I think that is the way how P5 sort of works. If you want to make it more smooth, of course, we need to do a little bit more around that. But for now, it seems like a nice, cool effect happening. So I'll let you play around more with this and see if you guys can play around with color or maybe something else, or create some sort of different effects. And you don't have to work on both coordinates together if you want to create a mirror effect or flip things, but now you know how to play around with it and you can create your own geometric patterns. So see you in the next video.